Bruce.
Hiya.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay, once you let me in.
Sorry,
No,
it's a game.
I didn't check the mic box or something like that. I don't know.
Sorry. Hey, I'm here with
But
my
here I
Dean.
am. Sure, listen. Working without pants once again.
What's that?
Working without pants once again.
Hey,
If I
that's
don't
good,
stay,
man. See,
I know.
that's
We
why
go
we do this
commando.
audio.
Last night I wore a belt for the first time in 9 months. I felt like I had the baby. I could put it back on. Anyway,
How you doing?
I'm carrying on. How about you?
Oh, we're doing good. We're ready to get out of this COVID thing and get back to normal, but can't complain.
Where are you?
We're in Omaha right now. We're going to be moving to LA soon.
Very wise choice.
Yeah.
I haven't been to Omaha in years. But when I was in journalism school, they said, yes, the Omaha World. There's a newspaper. You've got to read the Omaha World.
Yeah, it's barely hanging on. So it's
I know. We're like Britain now with national newspapers, and all the local ones have kind of gone tits up.
Yeah. So what we do here is we try to get as much information out of our guests in about an hour's time about their career, their story in the business. So being that you already started off talking about your journalism career, can we start a little bit? Do you got any good stories from your time in Chicago?
I suppose. Yeah. I mean, you have to ask me stuff, so,
Well, what I read there is you tried to buddy up with as many celebrities. You were doing celebrity pieces, right?
I was a feature writer for the Chicago Tribune, and a lot of it because of my show business background as a child actor and whatnot. I drifted towards the show business stuff, which involves celebrities, and a place like Chicago gets a lot of people, not only who are there to perform, but who come through to promote things, their upcoming movies, television shows, whatnot. So I had a lot of that going on. So there was no shortage of people who wanted to talk. So I did lots of those stories.
That's where you met Bette Midler, right?
That is true. Yes, at a nightclub, she was performing. She was on Broadway in Fiddler on the Roof, one of the daughters, and she used to go down the street from the theater to a club, to the Improv, and get up and sing. And the Improv is mostly a comedy club, and the owner, Bud Friedman, became her manager. And he sent her out on her vacation to a club in Chicago called Mr. Kelly's, which was a very hip club in the day. It was where where Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul and Bob Newhart, Shelley Berman, people like that, and singers like Sarah Vaughan and Peggy Lee performed. So she was an opening act for Jackie Vernon, who was a deadpan comic, and did not exactly draw the crowd that would love her, but she was fantastic. He asked me if I would go see her, and if I would I write about her. So I went to see her and I reviewed her and gave her a great review. And then we did an interview, and as she called me when the interview appeared a day later and said, "It's a very funny interview. You're a funny writer." And I said, "Well, you're very funny. You should talk more on stage." And she said, "You got any lines?" And that was the beginning. It was only 50 years ago, and we're still at it.
Hey, that's awesome. You got a question, Dean?
So yeah, you ended up, you worked a lot with Bette Midler. You did the movie A Divine Madness.
Yes,
correct?
That was it was a concert movie. That was her act. After The Rose, she became a movie star, and she couldn't figure out what to do next, what movie to do next. So when we had done The Rose, before it was released, we did Fox sent her out on not a world tour. It wound up being Europe. And the idea was and it was Europe and Australia, come to think of it. The idea was to get her known better by doing her show in those places. And it was a huge success. We wrote a book about it called The View from Abroad. And Divine Madness was the show that we had done on that tour. And so we did a new version of it and filmed it as a concert movie.
Okay.
So, yes, so I did that.
What did you do as far as acting when you were a child?
I was not a child star, and that's why we're having this conversation not in rehab. They don't do well, child stars, generally. I did commercials, and I was a model. I was a model for Lane Bryant, which was a department store that specialized in fat women. There were no plus sizes in those days. They called them fat women, and they started a line for fat kids. I guess there not being enough fat women in America, so I was one of the fat kids. It was called Charming Chubs, and I was a model for that. And then we became Stylish Stouts. That was the slightly older version, and then I became a husky, and my career ended. my modeling career ended, but I did a lot of theater when I was a kid. I did summer stock and yeah, I mean, I never went to Broadway. I never did any of that, but I was always working, and my parents saw that I enjoyed doing it. They kind of enabled me. They were not like the parents of child actors are usually in it for the money. They figure the kid will be a meal ticket. And my parents were never like that, but they just thought I was having a good time doing it, so they were all for it. My mother was a little starstruck, She was stage struck. She wasn't, Gypsy Rose Lee's mother. Yeah, she wasn't. Come on, we're playing the Orpheum circuit. She wasn't like that, but she had wanted to do that and married young and could never do it, and kind of basked in the glow from when I did it.
So you never felt pressured back then to do any work then?
No, I wasn't, bringing money in to feed the family. Any money that I made went into the college fund, the legendary college fund that everybody had in those days. Probably they still have it today. I don't know. I mean, there weren't student loans the way there are now. I mean, it's a whole different system, But yeah, it was all my money, and or was money for me. So it wasn't like they were expecting me to put food on the table at 7. No.
You've had one of the most legendary writing careers for sure. What was the most difficult thing that you've ever had to write as far as sitcom wise?
Sitcom wise, the kind of stuff I do, I write a lot of stuff for people to do as themselves. I mean, award show things, and that's hard to do because when an actor is coming on the Oscars, he may be a movie star, but he doesn't have a performing persona. It's not like Johnny Depp gets up. There is no an evening with Johnny Depp at Carnegie Hall. He doesn't tour that way. I mean, way back at the very beginning, he had a rock band, but he plays the characters that are written, and so when he has to get up and be himself, he has a hard time. He later on began developing a character to do on talk shows, which is like the Johnny Depp character, loosely based on Hunter Thompson, who he played in a movie, Where the Buffalo Roam, or Fear and Loathing. Fear and Loathing. That's Bill Murray played Hunter Thompson in Where the Buffalo Roam. And so he kind of like borrows from that character when he goes on Jimmy Fallon, that sort of thing. But when he has to come out and present the award for art direction, he doesn't really know what to do. So that stuff is hard to write. When Whoopi gets out there, it's different because she's Whoopi. And she's, has spent many years being Whoopi on stage. She's Whoopi on television every morning. So she knows who she is when she gets out there. I used to joke that Shirley MacLaine knows who she is and knows who she was because she made a big deal about living past lives. And I guess in one of them, she was also a stand-up comic because she knew what to do when she got out on stage. But that really is hard. It's hard to write for anybody who isn't naturally funny. I mean, to try and make them funny, the humor will come out of something that happens, something organic. It's hard to create that stuff.
You worked on the Martin Short show, didn't you?
I was a guest on the Martin Short show.
Oh, okay.
You mean his talk show?
My notes were a little wrong on this. My notes said that you were a writer on that.
No, I was on Hollywood Squares, and Marty was who was an old friend, was also a Hollywood Square a number of times. And King World, which owned Hollywood Squares, was producing the Martin Short show, and they were also producing Roseanne's talk show. And so I was on both of them because I was on Hollywood Squares, and I was on television every night back then, 20 years ago, whenever it was. And so I was a guest on his show, and I did a guest thing on his Broadway show too. When he had a show called Fame Becomes Me, which was a kind of a one-man show with about 12 people. It was an extravaganza, and I made guest appearances in that. But no, I didn't write on it though. But I've written for Marty for one thing or another. I mean, he's brilliant. He's crazy and brilliant.
He's hilarious.
Do you have a favorite person to write for?
Well, if I didn't say Bette Midler, I would be shot at dawn. I mean, it's been 50 years, so sure, yeah, she's my favorite. But I mean, I like them all. Whoopi's fabulous. I had a great time with Steve Martin and Billy Crystal, and I love Nathan Lane. I love writing for him when he goes on a talk show or stuff like that. Those are my faves. They're all
when you're writing
about me. There was a movie 20 years ago called Get Bruce, 1999, which was a documentary about what I do, and it was produced by Harvey Weinstein, who never laid a hand on me. I have a hashtag Why Not Me. I was ready to enable, but no, just like kept passing my station every time. But he did produce the movie, and he was very good at it. It was running a studio called Miramax, which he and his brother had sold to Walt Disney, to not Walt himself, but to the Disney Studios, and we made the movie and they distributed it, and it was a lot of fun. And it's still available. You can Netflix and chill, and all of those people are talking about what we do, the comedy stuff that we do.
So when you're writing for these guys, do you spend a lot of time with them, or do you, with people like Billy Crystal that you've written for a lot, do you just know that this material is going to work?
It depends on their work style. Billy is very hands-on. When you work with him, he sits in a room. I mean, he's 10 o'clock in the morning. You show up, there's a platter of bagels and lox because we're Jews, and we sit there and we eat and we work. And I mean, he's got many different collaborators for different projects. So, but he is quite disciplined that way. Whoopi is not so much. Whoopi will say, "Here's what it's got to be," and I'll send her material and she'll play with it and get up and do it. Robin Williams, I would send him stuff and he would read it, and then we would meet or we'd talk on the phone, and I would say I would take the material and ball it up and throw it into the cage, and he would dance around with it, and we would rework stuff. And he was also very big on going out to a club almost every night and working stuff up. So it varies, it depends on what the work situation is and what the task at hand is. If you're putting together an act for Bette, if she's going to do a concert tour, that's pretty work intensive. I mean, because she's a collaborator, and we'll get together and write it together, and I'll go away and write stuff and bring it back. And so yeah, a lot of them involve spending a lot of time, but some people just say, send me a page. I mean, there are a lot of when you're on staff on a talk show, there are about a dozen people writing, and basically everybody a bell goes off at 2:30 or whatever it is, and you have to just submit everything you've come up with. And then the host, your star, sits down with the head writer and goes and culls through what they're going to do. Johnny Carson, who you may or may not remember, because it depends on how old you are, they were famous for saying 18 jokes by 2:30. That meant at 2:30 you had to slide a piece of paper with 18 jokes on it that he could use in the monologue that night, which they would shoot at 5:30, and it would air obviously at 11:30, which was 8:30 California time. So it was very regimented that way. But he didn't want to hang out with you. You know, you had the gig, now just deliver the material. He was not a hangout kind of guy. And a lot of them are like that. A lot of them are just, no, you don't want to hang out with
me. What was there anybody that you worked with that just you absolutely dreaded, would not want to work with, that they were just impossible, wanted you to rewrite and...
Well, let me see. Who did I work with who's dead?
We can talk about them all day.
Who I can't ever work with again. This sounds like bullshit, but there was nobody who I dreaded working with. And I mean, some people were more difficult than others, but I had a long time to realize that difficult is one of those weird words that covers everything from being out of your mind insane to being just insecure, and that can vary from day to day. So there were some people who were, I knew there was going to be, it was going to be trouble. It was going to be work because you'd have to put up with their work habits. But it wasn't, there was nobody who, I would say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to work with that person. Unless, of course, they were Republicans. And then I would say right away, no, I'm not working.
Good choice, man. Good choice.
I've written for politicians, but no Republicans. No, not interested. Thank you. There's certain qualifiers. Or, I mean, there were situations where I knew somebody was kind of homophobic, and I didn't think it would be a comfortable situation, so I said no. But those were few and far between as I got older, and the world began to change.
Before we get too far off the subject, because we love these little unique stories when we can get them. We were big Robin Williams fan, and it's so cool that you got to work with him. Is there a cool little personal story that you can share, or a wild time you two had together that we can get out of you?
Oh God, let me think. Not really. I mean, I don't have a specific story. And if I do, I guess I'll save it for a book and come back and plug the book.
All right. We're all right there too.
Yeah. We're in the movie. We're in the movie together, and that's a funny sequence. But I don't really. I mean, he was, so much of there was a period in his life where a lot of his craziness was drug fueled, and I was not a part of that. But I don't have a real story, but an observation, which is true of other comics as well. He had a Robin Williams personality, and I mean, you could have a serious conversation with him, and you'd be sitting at a table in a restaurant, and somebody would come over, and he would become Robin. He would become that guy, speedy and physical and kind of all over the place. And then he would go back to being totally sober and straightforward. Don Rickles was like that too. I mean, he would sit there and you talk about the world situation, and then somebody would come over and you go, "What do you want, your hockey puck?" And we'd start. He would do 10 minutes on them, and then often he would go back and say, "So here's what I think about Khrushchev." I mean, it was or whatever. He was, but I don't have I don't have one of those Robin. I'm sure because I was never a club comic, and I didn't hang out around the clubs too much, because I just always found that atmosphere toxic, wildly competitive, and And also, it was quite homophobic in its day, and it was just not fun to be around. So I avoided it unless I actually had to sit there and work with somebody. There you go. That was hilarious.
No, that's great, man. One thing that I was going to ask you about being a club comic there that you were saying is, back then, what was it like? I do comedy now, but I like them old stories. What turned you off from wanting to do the club the most? Was there a certain night or time that you're just like, this isn't for me?
There wasn't one specific incident, but I had started performing in Chicago at a club called Punchinello's, which was a place that show people hung out at. Chicago's a big theater town, and so people, casts of shows would come after the show, and it's at 11 o'clock I'd get up and do the news of the day because I was working for the Chicago Tribune. And I had a piano player, and we'd do funny songs and all that. And I started kind of doing that, and then I didn't do it too much, and I wound up going back when AIDS happened, and we were doing all these celebrations of people who were dying, and I was emceeing them. So it's like AIDS kickstarted my comedy career. Sad to say. But I would get up and do that stuff. And so at a certain point, I said, okay, I'm going to give myself an act. And so I wrote an act. I'm about 40 already. And I started doing this stuff. And I worked in cabarets. I didn't work in comedy clubs because the energy in comedy clubs, well, first of all, I don't know anybody who goes to a comedy club. I think they're the squarest audiences in the world. But I think if you want to work on material that you can then sell to television, that's a great place to do it. And I hated it particularly because I didn't want to be, comic number 4 on the bill. Even if it's like, now here's our headliner. I had to follow 3 people. I wanted to work with places where people came to see me. I didn't want to work in a club where they came to have an evening of a comedy. I wasn't interested in that. That's not my energy. And so I didn't have to do it, fortunately. When I was on Hollywood Squares, and you were on television every night, you get a lot of offers to come and do your show at colleges and concert and stuff like that. So I did that instead of being, a club comic. And I admired people who can work like that. I do a show with Judy Gold we call Big and Tall, because I'm big and she's tall, and we're both gay and we're Jews, so we have built-in audiences. We play all over the country, but she really, when she doesn't have a night where she doesn't go to some ha-has, yuck-yucks, ho-hos, hoo-hoos, one of those clubs, and breaks in material. She's got a notebook and she's always breaking in new stuff, and that's her life. She loves it. It's not for me.
So you had mentioned that you had done some writing for concerts and that. What I'd say that you would work with Diana Ross, Barbara Streisand, Bette Midler, obviously, as well. And that you had, now this I want to make sure is true. Did you co-write a Village People song, Sex Over the Phone?
I did.
Really?
And it was banned in the UK. Yes, nice. The BBC banned it, and of course it went to #1 because on Radio 1, which was not the BBC, the competition. We did a Village People. I should back it up by saying I wrote the first draft of a movie called Can't Stop the Music, which was the Village People movie, and it was a legendary bomb. And I am on the DVD as an extra explaining how it happened. I quit after the first, but I'd sown the seeds of destruction. There was no question. But one of the bonuses of working on that was I met Jacques Morali, who created the Village People, and he said to me, "Darling, I think that you are a lyricist." He was very French. And I started writing lyrics. He had a show in Paris for the Crazy Horse. The Crazy Horse was one of those Parisian nightclubs where a lot of very statuesque girls with huge boobs came out on stage topless, and they would lip sync. and Jacques would write songs that they would lip sync, but he would have them recorded by famous people for a lot of money, and the girl would never attempt to imitate whoever the famous person was, but she would just lip sync. So we wrote a song for Eartha Kitt, and Eartha recorded it called "Where Is My Man," and they did it at the Crazy Horse with the 7-foot tall Amazon. With I mean, that she could stand upright without pitching forward was amazing. It was like Sophia Loren. She aerodynamically, she was a mess. And that became a big hit record in Europe. And it was a disco song, so that it, of course, didn't get any airplay in the States. But the 12-inch, you should pardon the expression, was played by DJs in all the clubs. And that led to Jacques. We did an album for Eartha, and then Jacques had to do an album for the Village People, his creation, a new album, and he asked me to come write it. So I wrote the album with him. And "Sex Over the Phone," I think, was the title of the album, and it was the first single. And it caused a mild sensation in London, but mild.
So now
yes,
with your writing credit that you have with like Diana Ross and Barbra Streisand, is that then for like joke writing for them while they're on stage?
It's called special material. That's what I have. Although I never actually, I did free stuff for Barbara for a couple of benefit concerts, but she didn't want to pay me enough to actually work on her when she came out of retirement, a stage retirement, and went back on the road. But Diana, I did an evening with Diana Ross, which was her first act away from Motown. It was her declaration of independence from Motown.
Okay.
And it was a huge hit. We played the Palace on Broadway and London Palladium and toured and did an NBC special that got nominated for an Emmy. And then I wrote for her a couple of times, a couple of shows after that. Mostly at that point, she was playing Vegas and concerts, that kind of stuff. So it was a special material credit. But I had acted with her when I was in Chicago. She made a picture called Mahogany that I'm in with her. I have one scene that remains because they recut because Berry Gordy fired the director and took over as the director. And I don't know if you know the movie, but it's about a girl from the projects in Chicago who wants to be a designer, and a photographer sees her on a fashion shoot and makes her a model and moves her to Rome, and she becomes a gigantic fashion model called Mahogany. And so I was in the Chicago part of the movie, and Barry wanted to get out of Chicago as fast as he could because Rome was much more picturesque. So all the stuff that we had shot in Chicago got cut, and one scene remained. And it's 32 minutes in, RuPaul told me. When I met RuPaul, he said, the first time I met him, he said, "You're in Mahogany," 32 minutes in. And I ran home, put on the VHS, and there I was, 32 minutes in. And I thought, not for nothing is he RuPaul. This guy's going to go places. And I mean, talk about due diligence. He knows.
That's great.
He's one smart cookie.
So let's go back to 1978. Do you remember the Star Wars holiday special?
How could I forget? It's like acid reflux. It never goes away. I'm actually writing a book, and I'm writing a book about how I wrote the worst television shows in history and lived. And of course, that's chapter 1. Because it lives in legend, But I think I first have to say, and people don't like it when I say this, but when we did that in 1978, Star Wars was not that big a deal. It was a big deal, but it had not yet become a religion. And a lot of people thought that it was just another stupid piece of crap summer movie that had gotten lightning in a bottle, and a lot of people had gone to see it. It was a huge hit, but there had not been. He had not yet shot The Empire Strikes Back, and that all of that had not happened. So the idea of a silly network television special with a lot of guest stars was not so crazy, because Star Wars was not a venerated artistic endeavor. And in the time after that, it became like the nerds' Scientology, and and anything that fan base could find that upset them, they viewed as a betrayal. And so George, began getting actual death threats when the internet came in, and people who had grown up watching the first three Star Wars movies on home video suddenly discovered this thing on the internet that they didn't know existed and were roundly offended by. So it became a thing. And every time George does another Star Wars movie, it surfaces again, to the point where he actually let Lego do a special called the Star Wars Holiday Special that refers to the old show, because he thought maybe if he does that, they'll forget about the old show. But it keeps coming back like a swan. It keeps coming back. So yeah, I remember it. I remember it. I remember it as well as I can remember it. You have to remember two things. One, it was 45 years ago, and two, if we had known we were going to be talking about it in 45 years, we would have paid closer attention. And three, it was 1977, and we were all chemically altered. This was not unusual, I mean, I used to joke about Carrie Fisher and I we were snorting the Sweet and Low at the cafeteria. I mean, and then when I joke about that, then I read things like, well, Bruce Vilanch, who was a cokehead in those days, and that's not exactly the truth. I mean, we all did a little bit of everything. I never had an addiction. I never was heavily into the drug scene. I sampled everything like everybody else.
Yeah, just indulge.
But certainly it informed the work environment on Star Wars, which itself led to being crazy, because it was an insane idea. But it was no more insane than other network specials at the time. They did a lot of crazy stuff.
So with that, were you given a lot of direction prior with that of what they wanted with it being a Star Wars special, or did they just tell you to run with it and give?
Well, everybody was working at cross purposes. CBS saw a way to have a Thanksgiving show that would be that would tap into the youth culture. And but they also wanted what traditional variety shows did, which was promote the network by putting stars of other shows on CBS on the show, and getting a spectrum of people to get all the demographics to watch the show. That was not George's intent. I believe that George was trying to sell them. He told me he had 10 Star Wars stories, and he had 6 movies he was going to make, and he was about to make number 2. I don't mean it the way it sounds. And he had he had one story left, and he sold it to CBS as an original musical, and it was the Wookiee story. And it struck me as odd that he would sell CBS a story for a musical starring characters who spoke no language known in any universe, and who, as I frequently said, sound like fat people having orgasms. Trust me, I do. And so we were kind of hampered in that we couldn't. There wasn't much. There wasn't dialogue. They wouldn't use subtitles because it was 1977, and they said nobody will read them. It's ironic because, as I said to last time I saw Lupita Nyong'o, I said, you didn't speak a single word of any known language in any of the Star Wars movies. Everything you said was subtitled. I mean, when we did the special, we couldn't have done that. So everything was subtitled. I mean, nothing was subtitled. So we had people explaining things. We had a Wookiee grunting, and Art Carney would explain what the grunt meant. And George had given us this story, and it was a Star Wars universe story about the Wookiees having a holiday, and Chewbacca wanting to get home, and so Han Solo and Princess Leia and were flying home to take him back to his planet, and there were stormtroopers chasing them, and they had to make stops along the way, which we used to interpret musical numbers. And he also had a virtual helmet creation of his, where you put the helmet on and it read your fantasies. And so we had, the grandpa had a fantasy that was Diane Carroll, and the kid had a fantasy that was Cirque du Soleil, which was just getting started. And it was that kind of mishigas, it was everything thrown into the thing, and added to which the art direction, while very nice for a television special, was nothing like the movie, and so it looked really cheesy. All of which was bound to turn off the religiosos of who viewed it 10 years later and later, 20 years later, 30 years later. But at the time, I mean, it was no worse than anything else. It was just ridiculous. Is what it was.
So I read that you actually tried out for the host of Hollywood Squares originally.
I did. I did. Well, Whoopi, they brought it back and they asked me to be the head writer. And I worked with these producers on Comic Relief and other stuff. And then they went to Whoopi and asked her to be center square. And she said yes. And she said, I think Vilanch should host it. And they all looked at each other and they said, well, they didn't want to piss her off early in the game. So they said, well, we'll test him. And it was ridiculous, And this one's for the win, Louise. It was, not me. And in fact, Whoopi and I campaigned for Tom Bergeron because he had a show on called Fox After Breakfast. It was on the Fox network in the morning. He hosted it with a hand puppet. He did not work the hand puppet. The hand puppet was his co-host. Many jokes about, it was the Kathy Lee Gifford of cloth. And we were both on the show for one reason or another, and we both said this would be the great guy, and so they got him. And then they put me in a square next to Whoopi. I think they were hoping I would tame her somehow, which of course, cannot be done. And as I joke, I say, yes, I was just to the left of Whoopi, if that's possible. But it stuck, and we had a good energy, and I was in the square for 4 years with her. And then after she left, I made sporadic appearances for the 2 years after that until the show went away. Yeah, but I could have hosted, but I couldn't have. That was.
Is Whoopi as feisty in real life as I hope she is?
Oh, she's absolutely what you see. Yeah, I mean, that's her. Yeah, she's never made any attempt to do anything else. And at the beginning of her career, it was viewed as a hindrance because, she was very street. And a lot of Black women resented that. They wanted Diane Carroll. They wanted, elegance. And they wanted Dionne Warwick. Dionne Warwick wanted elegance. And they would come to her and they would say, you've got to get rid of the dreads. You've got to get rid of those outfits, you have to spruce up because you're in, the white people are watching. And she resisted that. She said no, she's unique, and she knew it, and she was never going to do that. And as a result, she became a gigantic star. Also, she's brilliantly talented. She's a terrific actress. But she wanted to do. They kept saying, you can't do Star Trek. That's ridiculous. You're a movie star. She did Star Trek, and she's still a movie star. So you can't do The View. You can't do Hollywood Squares. Basically, she does what she likes to do, and that's her personality. It's that there's nothing. What you see is what you get. She's the real deal.
She's had an amazing career out of it as well, so it's worked for her.
Oh well, yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely.
We talked with Larry Hankin here recently, who told us that when he worked with Adam Sandler, he was quite the prankster. When you had the opportunity to work with Adam, what was your experience like?
Well, the only time I really worked with him, I've written some things for him for award shows, but he's been very. He knows what he's going to do on those things. So I write a first draft, and then he changes it around and does a character. He has an Adam Sandler character that he does when from SNL when he has to do those things. But he cast me in the Zohan. Don't mess with the Zohan. And it was one day, and he was shooting a new ending, and he had me and George Takei. We were a couple living in an apartment in the Village, and Dave Matthews was the villain, and he was a neo-Nazi, and at the end of it, in the new ending, he gets blown up and lands in our apartment with a cage full of beagle puppies that he's stolen. It's very involved. It's complicated. And he lands on the couch between the two of us, and he's very, very homophobic and anti-Semitic and everything. And he realizes he's in the apartment with two of the biggest queens in the world. Because wearing caftans and we're cigarette holders and drinking wine, and it's insane. And that's the whole thing. It's like a sight gag, It's maybe 30 seconds, and it took a day to shoot, and they paid us a tremendous amount of money to do it, and we had a great time. He was on the next stage. He had broken his leg, I think, and he was shooting a picture called Bedtime Stories, and he was waiting for his ankle to heal or something. So he was on a reclining chair looking at monitors watching this scene, and he couldn't really limp in. So between each take, we would run over to see what he thought of it. And he was great fun, but I mean, he didn't have time to play any pranks on us because it was one of those very expensive days that they were doing to try and get the ending right. But it's a really funny movie, and we get to see Lainie Kazan's rear end a lot. And it's a double. She told me later she wouldn't show her butt, but it just makes me laugh a lot. I mean, and I got to spend a day with Dave Matthews, who knew who I was, which I was kind of thrilled about because I'm a fan, and just the idea that I was actually working with Dave Matthews made me laugh. And George Takei, I mean, come on,
George is awesome, man. I'm a big George Takei fan. So
I love George. We did a reading of a show called Silver Foxes, which is meant to be a gay Golden Girls, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But we played the couple. I was B. Arthur, and he was Betty White, and we had Leslie Jordan was Rue McClanahan, and it was and who did we have? Was there an old? There wasn't an old lady, but there was not exactly Golden Girls, but it's about we were all living in a retirement community in Palm Springs, and in the pilot Leslie Jordan is in a senior center run by evangelicals, and they're not having him at all, and so we kidnap him and bring him to live in our pool house. Anyway, and George and I were a couple, and we had a great time doing it because, he's a really funny guy. Very, very arch and very subtle, as opposed to me, who's all over the place.
That show sounds like it'd be a funny show.
We thought so. I mean, there's such a thing as too gay for Logo. Can you believe that? Logo, it shows Golden Girls. That's their biggest show. So, but as was said to me, everybody has a funny old lady in their family. Not everybody has a gay uncle. I said, look around, look again, check around. You didn't go deep enough.
That's funny. So what do you do as far as activism?
Well, it's been a long and hoary road. It started with AIDS, basically. I mean, it started because it was affecting the gay community, and nobody wanted to touch it. They were scared of it, kind of like COVID at the beginning. And except that they knew if gay people were getting it, it wasn't like anybody getting it. because it's a sexually transmitted disease, and it was first transmitted by gay people, and they tend to have sex with other gay people. So that was how the virus was spreading, and we didn't even know it was a virus at that point. So nobody wanted to go near it as fundraising wise, and the government wasn't touching it. So we began doing these fundraisers and beg, borrowing, or stealing whatever we could. And I would go to people and I would say, if you do my disease, I'll do your disease. So I became familiar with all the big diseases. I did cerebral palsy and spinal bifida. I mean, I did all those things in exchange for them making appearances. And then Elizabeth Taylor stepped in after Rock Hudson got sick, and she gave the whole fundraising thing legitimacy. And in England, Princess Diana stepped in, and she gave it legitimacy over there. So there was a lot of activism for me was around that, was around raising money for that. And that once there was the cocktail and people were not dying in such numbers, and a lot of the activism community shifted to marriage equality, because we realized that was the only way we were going to become first-class citizens, was to have something big like that, where they couldn't discriminate legally. And you see what's going on now is all they have left to discriminate by is religious issues. They claim, they have a religious right to discriminate, which is crazy. But that was because marriage equality eliminated that. So that my activism has been around that. And of course, I grew up Jewish. And when you grow up Jewish, you learn that a lot of people hate you. A lot of people aren't going to help you, and you have to do it for yourself. And I always thought that was a great mantra for gay people too. You got to do it for yourself. So I was in there with various Jewish causes and gay causes, and those are my two minorities.
Speaking of being Jewish, I'm sorry if this is not true, but is it true that you weren't allowed into Marie Osmond's wedding because you're Jewish?
Yes, that's true. Her wedding was at the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, and no non-Mormons are allowed in. So it wasn't just the Jews. We all were sitting outside on lawn chairs, but it was people who weren't Mormon. It was Catholics. It was black people who weren't Mormon. But I don't think there were black Mormons back then, unless I'm misspeaking. So there was quite a crowd sitting outside, and it wasn't just the Jews. But and I don't know if the Mormons have changed that or not. I mean, I'm not up on Mormon stuff. Although Roseanne grew up in Salt Lake City, and she was Jewish and Mormon, which is a weird combo. Yeah, but we talked about it many years ago. But yeah, she said she wasn't allowed in either, I think. She said when she was younger there. It's hard to remember. Roseanne, I mean, also with Roseanne, it's you're never sure. Because at one point she told me she had 43 distinct personalities she'd been diagnosed with. And I said, I know, because number 36 is not speaking to number 28, and we would really like to get something settled.
She seems like she would be wild, man, for sure. It's a shame what they did to her with the TV show,
Well, she has a problem. I mean, I think she was getting crazier and kind of out of control, and I think that was what happened. Was they were at a crossroads, and they realized it wasn't going to get any better, and this was going to be the first of the really serious things they were going to have to deal with, and it was easier to just cut bait.
Yeah.
And then they circled back, and the show is a success without
and
her.
It has.
So. And it's really well written.
It is. I watch it myself too. It is.
It's very progressive for sure. It's nice to see, TV shows.
It's progressive.
That hit the issues.
What's interesting is that it maintains a kind of blue collar quality that she absolutely brought to it that hadn't been around before. That she fought for when she was on the show. For them not to let go. And it's clear that the people who came up with her, who were still involved with the show, maintain that mission. That it's not going to be about millennials, or if it is, it's going to be about blue collar millennials who are caught up in just kind of getting by, getting food on the table, and those issues that were always a part of the show.
Did you ever think way back in the day that you would ever see gay characters on mainstream TV like you do in certain shows these days?
No, I'm old enough to but I'm from an era pre-Stonewall where the idea of being out was never spoken of. So the idea that you would have a character who identified as gay on a show was kind of out of the question. The first one was Billy Crystal on Soap, and that was around 1977 when I first came out to Hollywood. And it was a woman named Susan Harris who later created the Golden Girls. And that was the first time because people didn't identify as gay. That was about 8 years after Stonewall, and there were enough people began saying, "By the way, I'm gay," that it was something that was in the air and in the culture. It hadn't been before. There were a lot of gay characters, but they were, all the stereotypical gay characters who you kind of, raise an eyebrow going, "Well, I get what his story is or her story." But so no, I never thought that would happen. But there's so much when I started writing, like for sitcoms, that you couldn't do that you can do now. I mean, the first episode of Two Broke Girls had a moment where one of the girls is in the kitchen and she's having sex with the cook, and loud sex, really loud sex. And the other one is a waitress on the floor, and she goes and a table calls her over, and they say, "Can you get our waitress?" And as they're saying this, there's this like piercing series of shrieks and moans that come from the kitchen. And the other waitress looks at them and says, "She's coming," and walks away. Now, we could never do that joke, right? I mean, anything like, now there are two schools of thought. You can say, "Oh my, that's subtle," or you can say, "Oh my, that's blatant," depending on your point of view. But it would never have flown. And now, that's like, you have to have that kind of stuff on those shows, or you're considered hopelessly square.
Now, do you feel that there's some shows that go out of the way to seek that?
Oh, absolutely. Everything does. SNL is like every joke is a sex joke now. Even the political stuff. They do a lot of political stuff, but a lot of sex stuff. It always winds up coming down to, their update has got cock jokes every single week. This one's penis, that one's penis, this one's penis. And that's because they know their crowd. And that happened after cable came in, and you could go on HBO and say anything, and people, as a result, gravitated to HBO because it was more real. And performers gravitated there because they could do stuff without stricture. And the end result is what we're now seeing on TV a lot, which is whatever you want. And also, the lines are blurred between what's streaming on Netflix and what you're seeing on Fox. And in order for any of the traditional networks to keep up, they have to allow all kinds of stuff. And I don't mind at all. It's much easier to write that stuff, and it's more fun. It sometimes isn't as challenging, but you kind of say, well, let's see how we can get away with this. But
so
it's kind of a burden has been lifted.
Do you think that show networks like Netflix and that have an unfair advantage because they don't have to abide by the same rating system as your regular TV networks do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's no question about it. Netflix say, "Oh, this is our most successful show." Nobody knows what the real numbers are, and when they talk about how many hits they've had. It doesn't mean people are watching it, but it never really has. The rating system has always been an agreement between people that random sampling is right, is correct, is science. And the fact is, it really is. And when something gets a gigantic rating, that there are a lot of people watching it. That there are a lot of people watching the Super Bowl. Nobody has to tell you that. And so, but the ratings reflect it. So they're not, They're not full of horseshit. They're real. But Netflix's ratings, no one understands how, or Amazon, how any of them actually gauge.
Yeah, last I see, Netflix wasn't releasing like any actual like rating data. That was pretty much take their word for it.
Yeah. When I was in college in Columbus, Ohio, we were a Nielsen family.
Really?
And we kept a diary. And so anything we wanted to promote, we would pretend that we had watched. And we would put it in there, and we'd have like, there were 7 people, and they were all like, between 18 and 49, and we were all income earners and all that, because that was how the advertisers would base their things. And I'm sure. And then the ratings came out, and we saw everything that we had liked was up in the ratings that week. So we thought, well, that's a random sample. It's the old story was, a random sample means if 1,200 people didn't watch TV and went to visit grandma, that means 12 million people didn't watch TV and went to visit. And the fact is, that's actually fairly accurate. That's the random sampling. You can't get a statistician to dump on it, because it's real. Isn't that fascinating?
It is actually.
I like it when we learn new stuff here, for sure. So.
Well, they also there were some families that had diaries, and some families actually had something hooked up to the set. But you can game the system either way. So that was meant to offset people who were gaming the system. But you can turn the TV on and walk out of the room, and it records that you watched the Doris Day show, whatever you were. You watched Gunsmoke, whether you watched it or not. It says that you did. So
that's awesome.
And that, in a way, that's what Netflix does. I mean, if you click on a Netflix show, it registers that you watched it, whether you watched it or not.
Yeah.
You may have been doing picture to picture and watching Pornhub at the same time. They don't know that.
But somehow you do, Bruce. That's what's weird about that.
I don't know where I got that idea.
That's exactly how I watch Netflix.
Well, it's a good way to watch Emily in Paris.
That's funny. So do you have anything coming up, Bruce, that people should look out for? Or?
I have nothing to plug. I'm in development on a bunch of stuff. It's been a year without pants, where I've been sitting at the computer and writing and Zooming a lot, and stuff's coming up, but it's not